Story 1. The Cabin That Wasn't There. Bitterroot Mountains, Idaho, Montana border. I thought I was hallucinating when I saw the chimney smoke. In the middle of a solo backpacking trip through the Bitterroot Mountains somewhere near the Idaho-Montana border, I was at least 15 miles off the nearest marked trail and hadn't seen another human being in 2 days. I'd planned the trip for months, hoping to disconnect and get some real solitude after a nasty divorce. On my third night, a storm rolled in, fast wind like a scream through the treetops and thunder shaking the earth. I was desperate for shelter, and that's when I saw it, a small log cabin tucked into a ravine, smoke curling from the chimney. No lights, no markings, but a godsend in the rain. I knocked on the door, no answer, then entered cautiously. It was warm inside, the fire crackling low in the hearth, an old rocking chair creaking slowly back and forth. That's when I noticed the dust. Thick layers on every surface except the floor, which had fresh, muddy footprints barefoot. I called out again, no reply. The smell of cedar and something metallic filled the air. I shut the door and told myself I'd stay one night and leave at dawn. Around 2:00 a.m. I woke up freezing. The fire was out. The rocking chair had stopped. The only sound was the wind howling outside until I heard breathing right next to me. I turned my flashlight on and saw nothing, but the air felt thick, oppressive, like I was underwater. Then the floor creaked from the corner of the room slowly and rhythmically, like someone pacing. I grabbed my pack and fled. When I turned back from the ridge, there was no smoke, no light, no cabin, just untouched forest. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing until I got home and developed a disposable camera I'd been using on the trip. One photo taken just before sundown showed the cabin clearly in the background. Only the structure was charred, black roof caved in like it had burned years ago, and standing in the open doorway was a pale figure with no eyes, just black sockets facing the camera. I don't hike alone anymore. Story 2, The Lantern Lady of Black Elk Trail, Black Hills, South Dakota. The light was always ahead of us, no matter how fast we hiked. My brother Alex and I were night hiking the Black Elk Trail in the Black Hills of South Dakota last September. Something we did every year to challenge ourselves, get weird stories, and test gear. That night was cool and foggy, the moon barely a whisper above the pines. Around 10:30 p.m., we spotted a dim lantern light flickering deep in the woods about 50 yards off trail. We thought it was another hiker, maybe lost or setting up camp illegally. So we called out. No response. Just the light swaying. We kept going. But then it appeared again, closer ahead of us this time. We hadn't passed anyone, no footsteps, no voices. We thought maybe someone was circling the trail, but the terrain made that impossible without us hearing it. The third time we saw it, less than 20 feet away, we stopped dead. That's when I noticed something off. The glow wasn't casting shadows, the trees didn't react to it, it just hovered. Then from the edge of the trail we saw her. A woman in a long black dress, barefoot, holding the lantern. Her skin was pale blue, lips, cracked eyes wide like she was looking through us. She didn't walk. She drifted, her feet barely touching the pine needles. She mouthed something, then disappeared behind a tree. When we reached the spot seconds later, she was gone. But the ground was wet, muddy, and in the center was a single print, barefoot with 5 toes, but it was twisted backward like someone had turned their foot all the way around. Alex nearly threw up. raced back down the trail and didn't stop until we hit the parking lot at Sylvan Lake. The ranger on duty that night looked sick when we told him. Said hikers had reported the same woman for decades. Some say she was a settler's wife who froze to death looking for help after her husband fell down a ravine. Others claim she's tied to an old Lakota legend about a spirit who guides the dying into the woods and away from safety. But every version ends the same: if you follow the light off the trail, you never come back. Alex and I don't hike at night anymore, and when I dream sometimes I see her lantern flickering just outside the window waiting. Story 3: The Screaming Trees of Flat Rock Forest, Western North Carolina. You don't forget the sound of the forest screaming. I was doing field research in Flat Rock Forest outside Hendersonville, North Carolina for a university environmental science program. We were gathering tree ring samples and soil data, pretty routine stuff, and I stayed back one night while the rest of the team headed into town. I pitched my tent near a spot locals called the Thinning, a strange patch where the trees bend inward unnaturally, like they're all bowing towards something. Our professor joked about it being cursed land. I thought it was just some weather anomaly. That night I fell asleep early but woke up around 1:40 a.m. to a sound I can only describe as a groan mixed with a whistle, like the forest itself was exhaling pain. It was long and low, vibrating the air around me. I sat frozen, every instinct screaming to run. Then from behind my tent came a louder sound, dry branches cracking like someone or something was circling me slowly. I unzipped the flap and saw nothing, but the air smelled like copper and burnt wood. I stood up, my flashlight flickering weakly, and scanned the tree line. All I could see were trees, bent, swaying, but no wind. Then I noticed something horrifying. The bark on every tree was marked with long parallel scratches, fresh and leaking sap that looked almost black. And then came the whisper, "Don't leave me." It came from behind me, but there was no one there. Just the trees groaning again, louder now, like they were in pain. I grabbed my pack and bolted for the car a mile away, tripping over roots and hearing that same phrase repeat in the wind. "Don't leave me. Don't leave me." The next morning, the rest of the team returned and found me asleep in the back seat, clutching a sample bag like a shield. They didn't believe me until we returned to the site. Every tree in the thinning had collapsed overnight, some sheared clean in half like they'd rotted instantly. The ground was scorched in a perfect circle. Our professor took one look and called the trip off. Weeks later, he sent me an article clipped from a 1952 local paper. It described a Cherokee legend about the forest that feeds a cursed grove that lures the lonely into its center and absorbs them into the soil. I haven't camped alone since, but sometimes I hear trees creak in the wind and they almost sound like they're crying. And Story 4, The Thing That Watches from the Ridge, Trinity Alps, Northern California. Started with the feeling of being watched, subtle at first, like the weight of someone's eyes just behind your shoulder. My friend Jacob and I were deep in the Trinity Alps of Northern California, on a 6-day backcountry route most people don't even attempt without a guide. We had all our permits, gear, and satellite tracking, and after 3 days of climbing through granite basins and pine valleys, we pitched camp in a narrow saddle between two ridges. That night, the moon was bone white, casting long shadows across the glacial rocks. I stepped away from the tent around midnight to relieve myself and caught movement up on the ridge, something upright, tall, watching from the edge of the slope. I called out, thinking maybe it was a hiker who got separated. No answer. Jacob thought I imagined it. The next night it got worse. Around 2 a.m. we both woke to the sound of stones shifting, small ones like pebbles being picked up and dropped. It echoed around the basin like a deliberate signal. When we peeked outside there, it was again silhouetted against the skyline. Too tall, too thin, and completely motionless. No flashlight, no breathing. Just standing there. The shape vanished by morning. But the third night broke us. We were roasting instant coffee over the jet boil when we noticed new rock cairns, small piles of stones arranged in a circle around our tent. We hadn't built them. I checked the satellite tracker, it was off. No signal. And that night the whispering started. Not words, just sound wind-like, but deeper, as if it were being blown across a hollow throat. It came from everywhere. At 3:13 a.m., our tent collapsed inward like someone had jumped on it. We screamed and scrambled out, but there was nothing around. Just disturbed pine needles and one fresh print in the dirt, elongated with no heel, like something walked on pads. We packed and hiked the trailhead 18 miles straight through the next day. When we checked with rangers, they just exchanged looks and said, "You made it out, so don't ask too much." Later we learned that area of the Alps is tied to multiple Miwok and Wintu legends of a forest spirit called Onawan, the one who waits. It never speaks, never moves, just watches until you leave nor don't. Now I keep a cairn by my front door. Not as a decoration, but as a warning. Story 5, The Howler by the Lake, Eagle Cap Wilderness, Oregon. I always thought the stories about animal spirits were campfire myths until I heard it howl. It was June 2022 when my cousin Brian and I did a weekend trip into the Eagle Cap Wilderness in northeastern Oregon. The plan was to camp near Mirror Lake, a quiet spot known for crystal clear reflections and rarely any visitors after dark. We hiked in, set up camp near a patch of wind-warped pines, and spent the first night sipping bourbon and watching the stars dance over the lake. But at 3:07 a.m. I woke to a noise that didn't belong. Not an animal, not the wind. It was a low guttural howl, like a wolf with a broken throat stretched into a slow wail. It echoed across the lake in a way that made my skin crawl. Brian whispered from the other sleeping bag, "Do you hear that?" Before I could answer, something large moved just beyond the tree line. Not walking, galloping, then stopping, then galloping again. We stayed frozen, hoping it would pass. The next morning, we found fresh claw marks on a nearby tree, 3 long gouges that went 7 feet up the trunk. Way too high for a bear. That afternoon, we ran into a forest ranger named Manny at the edge of a nearby trail spur. We mentioned the noise, half joking. His face turned serious. He asked, "Did it come from the lake?" We nodded. He told us an old Nez Perce legend about a skinwalker that haunted the region, one that took the form of a half-wolf, half-man creature that only showed itself around lakes just before the summer solstice. It didn't kill unless spoken to. It hated being acknowledged. That night we agreed to stay silent if we heard it again. But at 3:07 a.m. sharp it returned, this time closer, louder. The tent walls vibrated with each growl. Then a handprint, yes, a hand, not a paw, pressed into the nylon. 5 fingers, too long, too thin. I covered my mouth. Brian made the mistake of whispering, "Jesus Christ," and the second he did, the howling stopped. Silence, utter horrible silence. Then it ripped through the tent like paper. I don't remember running, just waking up by a ranger's fire at sunrise, shaking and covered in pine needles. Brian made it out too, but he doesn't talk anymore. Not about that night. Not at all. And every year around the same time I dream about the lake, the howl, and the voice that whispers you spoke.